What is up, you guys? Glitches here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you the long anticipated updated Shrapnel build for full release. A lot of you guys liked the Shrapnel build that I made in the beta. Unfortunately, a lot of things have changed. Mods have been changed around on what pieces of equipment you can use. Certain damage types aren't as good as they were before, so we had to change things up a little bit, but I think you're going to be pretty impressed with this new build. Shout out to Skidbot. Him and I bounced ideas back and forth. He's like a shrapnel guru. He's got a video out already that's very similar to the build that I'm bringing you today, where he gets upwards of 118,000 DPS with everything procced at the same time on bosses, which is insane. I've gotten this between 75 and 80,000, but my stuff isn't min-maxed yet, so keep that in mind. There is a ton of room for more improvements on this build, but the mods and what I'm going to be showing you should be pretty much the same. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. So first thing that we can start out with is the gear. The secondary weapon, I put it in my primary that we're going to be running, is one of two options. I'm going to show a secondary weapon that a lot of people don't think about. First is going to be the recurve crossbow. I recommend this when you're going against bosses and big single target enemies. The reason why this weapon is good is because on a weak spot hit, you inflict the bullseye on enemies, which will basically increase the amount of crit rate and crit damage that you do against them for a certain period of time. So a really good effect, and we want to try and proc this bullseye effect on our targets before we start attacking them. I like to personally run for the calibration, the portable style weapon calibration on it, because it gives increased movement speed while firing and 35% bonus switching speed. So the faster we can switch off the crossbow and switch to our assault rifle, the more damage we're going to be able to do. The rest of the secondary perks aren't a big deal because they're really only going to be firing one shot off. Now the alternate weapon that you can use that I highly recommend for things where you have a lot of smaller enemies that are grouped up is actually going to be the Deagle 50 caliber wildfire pistol. This is really good because of its perks. Not only can it also trigger bullseye, but unlike the crossbow, it doesn't require a weak spot hit. Instead of it being a 100% guarantee with a weak spot, it is a 60% chance from anywhere on the body, but because it fires so quickly, you can just spam a couple rounds into it and you're almost guaranteed within one or two hits to just instantly trigger bullseye, whether the weak spot's visible or not. But the other really cool perk, and this is why I said it's good for densely packed mobs and like silos, territory purifications, or even the secondary encounters during the raids where you get a ton of enemies. The secondary perk on this weapon has an 80% chance to spread the bullseye effect to an additional enemy within 15 meters for 80% chance after hitting your first one. So what you can do with this particular weapon is combo it with a gold mod called Spreading Marks, which when a marked enemy is defeated, either with this hand cannon or with your assault rifle, the bullseye will then spread to another enemy. So there's basically a chance with this mod that as soon as you target and kill your first marked enemy, two other nearby targets will also get marked. So instead of having to sit there and reload one by one with your crossbow, you can just fire a couple shots into a crowd with this hand cannon, and it's going to just mass spread bullseye marks to every single smaller enemy in the area instantly, giving you a bonus damage modifier to all of them all at the same time. So really cool hand cannon that is good at spreading that debuff on multiple enemies in a quick fashion. So really cool combo that you can do, and this is a sleeper weapon. Not many people talk about this. Almost every video I've seen, everyone just recommends the crossbow, but this is a really good alternate. Maybe I'll show a clip here of just how quickly those marked targets can spread once you start shooting your bullets. So really good alternate choice for spreading bullseye when you're not going against a boss. If you're going against a single target, I would still recommend the crossbow. And for those of you that don't know what the bullseye does, if we just click this, for example, and go to basically bullseye, you can hit X to cover keywords. Highlight marked target will be outlined and suffer from vulnerability plus 8% for 12 seconds. This basically increases your crit rate and crit chance against that enemy for a brief time. So basically making them take more damage, long story short. So you ideally want to, especially on bosses, proc the bullseye first, then switch to your main DPS weapon and put all your ammunition into them, because they're going to be taking more damage once that bullseye is attached to them. So that is the two options I would recommend for our primary bullseye weapon. But for the main weapon, we obviously got to run that Last Valor, the Soaker Assault Rifle. The reason why this one's so good is because of its passive perks as well, all shrapnel based. You get a 4% chance to trigger shrapnel with a hit, and critical hits count as 2 hits. So every time that you crit with this weapon, you're actually going to proc shrapnel twice, and the basically shrapnel damage is going to be buffed by an additional 30% flat out with this weapon, which is really, really strong. For the calibration, I like to run precision style. It gives us plus 25% attack damage, weapon damage basically, which is really, really good, because if we go to the tooltip again and go to, for example, the shrapnel and do the X again, you'll notice that for shrapnel, all of our shrapnel damage is based off of weapon damage. So weapon damage is actually a multiplicative damage modifier, whereas things like crit damage and crit rate and stuff, that's additive. So if you have a decent amount, you want to find a good balance between the two, because if you have a decent amount of weapon damage, that's going to just multiply the effects of all your other crit damage that you're going to do and make those numbers a lot higher as well, because our base shrapnel damage is based off of it. So really, really good perk. Basically, the 3 things you kind of want to focus on, well, technically 4, is weapon damage for your secondary perks, crit damage, crit rate, and damage to great ones for bosses. If you can get those 4 secondary perks on all of your mods, you're going to be in really good shape for late game, because you're just going to be dishing out tons of damage with those perks with this particular build. I will actually demonstrate 2 variations of this build once we go up to the dummy and do some damage tests here that I think you're going to find pretty interesting. This particular one I'm showing first is going to be for burst damage, has a lot of high DPS. The second one will have a little bit less DPS, but the sustained damage of how much you can do without reloading is actually insane. So I'll show that here in a minute once we're done with this first build. But moving on, for the weapon itself, what I like to run and what I consider the best one, excuse me, is the Obliterate mod. I have gold versions of the Obliterate mod, but unfortunately none of them have those good secondary perks on it yet. So that's one thing that can obviously improve with my build, is find the gold version. The one reason I'm not too upset about having the purple version of Obliterate is, unlike pretty much every other gold mod in the game, the base perk, which is the more parts shrapnel hits, the higher the shrapnel damage, and each part gets plus 15%. You'll notice that if you go to the gold version of Obliterate, it has the same plus 15%. So the purple base stat and the gold mod base stat are exactly the same. The only difference with the gold version is you get 4 potential substats, whereas the purple one, you only get 3. So there's a higher potential to get more damage with the gold mod. But that base core 15% that you're getting for the parts, the main ability of it, is going to be the same across the board. So that's why I'm using the purple one, because this one I have has crit damage and increased magazine capacity and great ones on it. And the gold ones I have currently just aren't that good of rolls. Once I get the gold one with some crit damage on it and things like that, I'll definitely switch, obviously. But for now, purple is fine. And we still do a ton of damage, as you see. But just know it can get better. So that's the first mod that you're going to want to run, is Obliterate, ideally Violent. The Violent variation typically has crit damage on it as the main first stat. Moving on to armor. For the helmets, I like to run the Beret. This basically is good because it increases the number of parts that our shrapnels hit, so increases the trigger count, basically. We're getting 2 from the crit hits with the Soaker machine gun perk itself, and then we're going to get another one, so potentially 4 on a critical hit total with the Beret, which is just a big boost in shrapnel damage as well, because it's going to be hitting 4 parts at a time every time you crit, which is really, really nice. And the other options you can potentially run, if we go to blueprints, and this is a little controversial, is either between the cage helmet or the gas tight helmet. The cage helmet is almost identical to the Beret, pretty much the same exact key perk, increases the shrapnel trigger count by 1, so you're just getting that 1 bonus proc of your shrapnel damage. But the exotic helmet has a bit more HP and a bit more psi intensity, which is always nice. The other option which won't be good for our particular build. But if you're running something like Shrapnel Smash, for example, or the perk on the mask, which I'll go over later, that basically removes basically weak spot damage, but increases your crit rate and crit damage on Shrapnel. This one is potentially good for that because we're not basically dealing with weak spots anymore. And that basically limits the amount of shrapnel hits that you can get to 1. That's actually kind of misleading because with your assault rifle, you can still get 2 procs. And it increases your shrapnel damage by 120%. So you get a nice jump to your shrapnel damage. However, this is really only good if you're not focusing on straight up crit damage and crit rate, and you're going more with like the explosive shrapnel, where every 20th shrapnel hit, I believe it's a mask perk, every 20th shrapnel hit will do 300% bonus damage. That would be right here. So a good, basically, alternative if you want to run the gas mask would be explosive shrapnel, because the base stats on the gas mask are a little bit better than the beret, and with testing on the beret and the gas mask, you get pretty much the same number of shrapnel procs with this particular perk. You get about 1 or 2 depending on how much your magazine can hold. So you'll get a little bit more with the gas mask, but for our particular build, because we want to get as many shrapnel procs as possible, we don't want to limit ourselves to just 1 or 2 hits with the gas mask. So in our case, with the build that we're going with, which is strictly max crit damage and crit rate, the beret will be better. But moving on to the mod that I like to run on this is going to be Momentum Up, preferably the Violent variant, because that will have crit damage as the main perk, secondary perk. And what this does is it increases our fire rate by 10%, which is really good because that precision calibration that we put on the assault rifle gives us minus 10% on the fire rate. So this will make up for that and allow us to fire at our normal rate for the first half of our magazine. But it also gives us plus 30% weapon damage, which again is what all of our shrapnel damage is based off of, for the second half of our magazine. So your weapon will start slowing down towards the end, but you're going to be doing a bunch more damage. And then again, you want that crit damage, damage against great ones, and weapon damage, which I happen to find a version that had all 3 of those on it. So this is a really good momentum up roll that I'll be rocking for sure. And this one can also be enhanced even further, which is nice. But I'm only 4 out of 5 right now. So hopefully I get that plus 12% purple crit damage when I do my 5th roll on this. But yeah, really good mod there for the helmet. Moving on to the mask. And by the way, we want to run, for late game, a 4-piece Lone Wolf set. And the reason why you want to run Lone Wolf is because not only with 2-piece set bonus do you get 5% more crit rate, but the 3-piece set bonus gets 1 stack of Lone Shadow with every 2 weapon critical hits, which we'll be doing all the time. And with Lone Shadow, our crit damage gets plus 6% for 30 seconds, and it can stack up to 8 times. So that's a big jump in critical damage right there. And then with the 4-piece, that Lone Shadow stacks. Speak normal, Brandon. Increases to 10 total, so that's potentially 60% bonus critical damage that we're going to be getting, and our crit rate increases by 8% for 2 seconds. So really, really good set bonuses for shrapnel builds. You can use this on a lot of different builds, honestly. Lone Wolf this season is really, really good. I recommend it. But for the mask, we're using the Lone Wolf mask, and the mod that I like to run on it for our particular build is going to be Targeted Strike. Mine is kind of off. Ideally, I'd have weapon damage, great one, and crit damage on it, but I was only able to get a decent precision variant right now. So I'm using it just because it's good on the build, but there is room for improvement to get some more crit damage. But when hitting marked enemies, which will combo with our bullseye from the crossbow, your crit rate increases by an additional 10%, and crit damage gets increased by 25%. So big jump in damage for the build there. And again, better secondary mod perks will make this even stronger. Moving on to the gloves, we have the Lone Wolf gloves. On my gloves, I like to run the crit amplifier, preferably the violent variation, because that will have crit damage. I've got a decent roll on this one as well. It has 12% crit damage, Preferably, this would have weapon damage and great one damage on it, or even magazine capacity would be good as well. So there is a little bit of room for improvement on this as well. But this gives plus 10% flat crit rate and 15% flat crit damage. So again, building into those crit damage and crit rate for the build, really, really good on the gloves. Moving on to the boots, we have the Lone Wolf shoes. This one can obviously be better. I'm running the purple version. Taking no damage is called Covered Advanced, by the way. Taking no damage within 6 seconds grants plus 16% melee weapon and status damage for 30 seconds. You can also use Slow and Steady. That is another good option. They both give 20% boosts. The only difference is, for this one, Slow and Steady, you have to be above 90% health. If you're not above 90%, you're not going to be getting 10%, half of basically the damage of what this mod gives you. It does give 10% flat out, so you'll always have 10%, but you're losing half of it if you lose any of your health bar, basically. The reason why I liked Covered Advance better is because not only on the gold mod does the basically cooldown reduce to 4 seconds instead of 6 seconds, but how it works is taking no damage within 4 seconds grants instantly that full 20% melee weapon and status damage boost for 30 seconds. So as long as you're running around and not getting hit within 4 seconds with the gold variation, you're just instantly getting a 20% buff, regardless of what your health is at, which is really, really good. I am obviously running the purple variation, which isn't as good as the gold one, only because the purple one I have has great ones damage and crit damage, which between those two is currently giving me more DPS than the gold ones that I have. I got some really crappy rolls. I got element damage and HP and stuff like that. So ideally, the next thing on my agenda is finding a gold mod of Covered Advance that has that crit damage and great one damage on it. As soon as I get that, I'll obviously swap the purple one out with a gold one. But for right now, the gold is fine. We still do a ton of damage. But Covered Advance or Slow and Steady, really good on the boots. Moving on to the jacket. This is where it changes a little bit. I like to run one piece of the Bastille set. The reason being is the tier 1 piece perk for the set is actually really, really good. When your HP is above 70%, you get 10% weapon damage. And again, all of our shrapnel procs are based off weapon damage. So a really, really good perk to have for just one piece of a set. So basically, Bastille gives us the bonus to shrapnel. 4-piece Lone Wolf gives us the crazy boost to crit rate and crit damage. And then Bastille increases our base damage of our shrapnel because of the weapon damage bonus. So they all kind of synergize together. Really, really good combo. But for the chest piece, I have just a blue crit damage enhancement mod on it. This will give you +2 crit rate and +12 crit damage. Mine also rolled with crit damage and great one damage, which is, again, obviously really good. I can even, actually, I already enhanced this one, but still really good for a blue mod. And just proves that you don't need to have purple or golds on every single piece of armor. The good offense is the best defense, in my opinion. More damage you're doing, the faster the enemy is going to die. So we'll just stack that crit rate and crit damage. And then last but not least, for the pants, we get the 4th and final piece of the Lone Wolf set. And on the pants, I run Deadshot Violent variation because of the crit damage. Each critical hit by a non-melee weapon grants +5% crit damage up to 45% bonus critical damage. The effect is removed upon a reload. The crit damage is 12% on this, but again, I've got weapon damage and great one damage on it, so another really good roll for this mod. This is probably one that I won't have to get a new one. It's pretty decent. But yeah, really, really good perk for the boots. You can run something like Bullet Siphon. Weapon damage gets +5% every 5 bullets that are consumed in the magazine, or +5%. And then every 5 bullets consumed in the magazine grants 4% bonus weapon damage, capped at 20%. So this is actually really good for the secondary option of the build that I'm going to show you. After we do the first damage test, I'll go over this in a minute, but this is also a really good option if you don't have Deadshot. But before we move on to the damage test, I want to go over food and our mimetics. So for the mimetics cradle, the perks that I like to take are obviously automatic weapon enhancement. Damage gets increased by 20% when holding rifles, LMGs, or SMGs. You also get a 10% reload of the magazine capacity from reserves upon defeating an enemy. So really good because we're running the assault rifle. On the second row, I like to take Master Tactician. You won't see this on the dummy, but if you're going against a Great One boss, this is really good. Just by using a tactical item, you don't even have to hit the boss with it. You basically get plus 25% damage against the Great One boss for 15 seconds. So you just throw a grenade, throw a knife really quick, and you're getting 25 bonus damage against the boss. You can just burn them down really quick just by throwing a tactical item. Next, I like to run Deviation Master. As long as you have something like the Butterfly or the Wolf. The Wolf, in my opinion, is probably the best for Shrapnel. I'll go over that here in a minute. But as long as you have your Deviant out, you'll get plus 50% bonus damage to all Deviants that you're attacking while your Deviant's out, so big boost there. Rapid Aid reduces the cooldown of healing items by 30% and increases their potency by 15%, so nice little buff to our activators. Next, I take Tactical Combo, weapon damage, obviously good for Shrapnel, increases by 25% for 4 seconds after switching weapons or reloading. So this combos really well with our crossbow. We shoot the crossbow, inflict bullseye, switch to our assault rifle, which then procs Tactical Combo, giving us 4 seconds of 25% bonus damage for some nice burst damage. And then I also like Sprint because I like to be able to move around. Movement speed plus 5% and running stamina cost minus 15%. This will be good if you don't have the full Lone Wolf set and you're running something like Falcon, for example, because that's all based on your stamina regen and things like that to give you bonus crit rate. That is something I forgot to mention. If you don't have all the exotic pieces, Falcon set, 4-piece Falcon is a really good alternative. And this pairs well with that. Moving on, I also like to take Deadly Combo. After hitting a weak spot with bullet effects such as bounce or shrapnel, the bullet effects damage, so our shrapnel damage basically, gets increased by 25% for 3 seconds. Nice little burst to shrapnel damage there, or boost rather. And then last but not least, I like to take Bullet Hunt. After killing a target with ranged weapons, your shrapnel damage increases by another 35% for 15 seconds. So those are the main perks I take. Another decent one is Bounty Hunter. After defeating a unit you marked with weapon, in this case bullseye, for example, your weapon damage, which all of our shrapnel damage is based off, will increase by 25%, and weak spot damage will be increased by 35% for 15 seconds. So also not a bad one to take if you're going against a lot of smaller enemies, where you're going to be killing things pretty frequently, like elites and stuff. This isn't a bad one to take either. Could swap this with like Master Tactician. If you're not going against a great one and you're just doing like a silo boss, you could drop this and put on Bounty Hunter. This would probably be better for silo runs, so just be aware of that. The last thing I want to go over is food items. There's 2 in particular that are really good for shrapnel builds. The first one is going to be canned meat. This one's a little bit easier to craft, and basically why this one's so good is it increases your character's shrapnel damage output by 20%. I'll probably eat one of these. I always have one on me when I'm using my shrapnel build before we do the damage test, because that's going to give us a nice boost of DPS there. The other good one that you can potentially do, depending on the style of shrapnel build that you're running, is going to be the Stardust Pumpkin Salad. This is good because it increases your crit damage, which our whole build is based around crit damage, by an additional 15%. So another really good option there. So keep those 2 in the back of your head for things to potentially grow crops for. I always have some pumpkins in my garden, things like that. I'm always converting salt water into salt because it needs salt. So those 2 food items are really, really good for shrapnel builds. While we're here, let's go ahead and pop one of those so I don't forget. And I'll also drink a water here. But let's go up and do the damage test. And then once we do this first damage test with our main build setup, I'll show you the alternate setup that you can do for sustained damage. That's really, really good. So ideally, when you're in a silo or a raid, for example, you're constantly going to be killing enemies. So your 10 Lone Wolf stacks to give you that bonus crit damage will usually be full. For the test dummy, though, to get maximum damage output, I'm going to take a second to prime that stack because we can't set it to great ones or whatever. It's just kind of a default dummy. So I'm going to shoot the dummy, get to 10 Lone Wolf stacks, Then the order of operations that you want to do once you hit 10 stacks is take out your Deviant. That will boost it by 50%. Immediately switch to your crossbow, shoot the bullseye to proc bullseye and add vulnerability, then immediately swap to your soaker and start taking down the dummy with your assault rifle. And with those three combinations in combination with our food item, we'll see how much damage we do. So let's go ahead and prime, make sure my crossbow is reloaded. Let's go ahead and prime our 10 stacks of Lone Wolf. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. Let's go ahead and quickly reload. Take out our Deviant. Hit the bullseye. Boom. 79 I saw there. So almost 80,000 damage that we got with this build. But you notice we only did 474,000 basically sustained damage. So you got really high burst damage, but only 470,000 sustained damage. Now, this alternate build that I want to show you guys that not many people talk about will be really good for 2 bosses or 3 bosses in particular that I can think of. One being Men's Devorin, because he's super tanky and has a ton of health. And then the other one being the 2 raid bosses, because they have a ton of health and multiple phases where they have really long, basically damage phases where you don't want to lose DPS by reloading constantly. If you can keep firing, it'll actually give you more basically end damage because of not having to reload. And the way you get that combo to work is by, on your assault rifle, switch from Obliterate to another really good shrapnel mod called basically Shrapnel Souvenir. We'll do this one here because it's got good crit damage. And what Shrapnel Souvenir does is whenever your shrapnel hits a weak spot, and by the way, if you're shooting the weak spot on an enemy, your shrapnel can't hit it. So if you're running this particular setup, this alternate variation setup, you don't want to shoot the weak spot. Just shoot the enemy in the chest or something like that. That way your shrapnel can hit the weak spot. But when hitting a weak spot with shrapnel, it will automatically refill 1 bullet from your inventory automatically. Now you combo this, so let's go ahead and equip that. You combo this with a different mod on your mask. Instead of running Targeted Strike, you run another mod called, where are you at? Shrapnel Carnage. May sound familiar. This was the go-to perk that I used in my beta build. The reason we couldn't build the same way we did last time is because Shrapnel Carnage used to be a weapon mod in the beta, but now they made it a mask mod, so you can no longer do the epic combo of both Targeted Strike and Shrapnel Carnage at the same time. You have to pick one or the other. That's why it's not as good anymore. But if you pick Shrapnel Carnage, what that does is it increases the hit spot weight, basically hit weight, by 100%, so it doubles the chances of all of your shrapnel hitting the weak spot, and the shrapnel weak spot damage is increased by 25%. So what this combo will do is it basically makes your shrapnel trigger that weak spot more frequently, which will then funnel extra ammunition into your magazine and basically turn your assault rifle into an LMG with like a never-ending mag. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll see the difference in DPS. The DPS is obviously going to be a little bit lower. It'll still be pretty decent. It'll be a little bit lower, but watch the final sustained damage output. Remember, we had 474,000 total damage with the previous one for sustained damage, but watch what you get with this particular setup for sustained damage. Really, really good for long DPS phases. So we want to take out our Deviant, swap to the crossbow, damage, and then hit the body instead. Now watch how long that we can fire. We're still doing 66, 68, 70,000 damage. We're still doing 70,000 damage. But look at how long we can fire for. This will go on forever. With all the procs that we're getting, it just reloads, 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 reloads. We're finally getting down. It's finally catching up. Still not yet, still not yet. There we go. 1,774,000. So we went from 80,000 DPS with only 474,000 total damage to 70,000 damage, so 10,000 less DPS, but almost 2 million sustained damage. So depending on which route you want to go and what you think is better, this could be also another very, very strong combo that you can run. So definitely a good viable option for late game bosses that have a ton of health. So I definitely wanted to show you guys those two variations because that combo is pretty ridiculous, and I haven't seen many people showing that combo off yet. So the things that I'm hoping make my build video a little bit different than others is A, showing off those two really cool variations in the build, and B, showing off the sleeper weapon that almost no one is talking about in the form of the Deagle Wildfire to spread marks really, really quick. Another really good option for secondary marks to add bullseye. I would, if you're running against bosses, I would run the crossbow, but if you're doing silo runs, things like that, I would use the Deagle Wildfire if you have it, and you can actually buy that for only like 3,000 Starcrum, the blueprint straight up from the Wish Machine, I believe. So, but that's what I did. So really, really good alternate option there. So yeah, as you can see, ton of damage with this build, and it's not even fully optimized. If you guys enjoyed it, if you found it informative, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. I appreciate all of your guys' feedback. Also, if you want to keep up to date with all my future videos, again, I plan on revamping all the old builds the best I can that I made during the beta to new full release updated versions. So by subscribing and turning on that notification bell, you can keep up to date with all those future alerts. And then last but not least, if you want to join a community of like-minded gamers, feel free to check the links down in the description and join us on the Discord. We have almost 1,000 members in there now, many of which are playing Once Human and always looking for new people to hang out with and play with. So hopefully you join up and we see you guys around here soon. But until then, hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you all later.